Continuing from the previous lesson, we'll finish constructing a shading network that'll allow us to control the placement of a texture using a NURBS curve as the controller. Okay, so this is where we left off in the last lesson. Okay, and basically what we've got is a curve shape. In other words, this particular curve. And this curve is being coupled with a sampler info to gather points, to gather point data on that particular curve. We can then feed that into a vector product that will actually be watching the specific distance or the tangency between these points, and then it's feeding that output x into the rotate frame. Now, why the output x? Basically what that'll do is as we move these points along the x-axis, that will be controlling the rotation of these particular points. Okay, so let's take a look at what we actually set up in the previous lesson. So if we take these points on this curve and begin moving them, if you look very closely, you can start to see sort of the relation that we've got. So as we take these points and begin to actually move them, you can see how this surface is bending, or the actual placement is bending appropriately. Okay, now remember, the surface itself is not actually deforming at all. It's just the actual texture itself that's deforming. So let's actually undo a couple of steps and let's rebuild this curve so that it's actually got a few more control points to be able to adjust. So with this curve selected, let's go up to Edit Curves and let's rebuild this curve. And I'll go ahead and just reset this just so everything's back to normal. And let's say we wanted to add, let's say 6 points to this curve. One thing that we do want to make sure is that it's rebuilt from 0 to 1. Okay, that's actually very important. So that way the entire length of this curve will control the entire length of this surface. If you don't rebuild it from 0 to 1, you may not actually wind up with that. Okay, so let's actually take a few of these points and move them around. And again, what you should see is this surface actually, or not the surface, the actual placement of this texture deforming. Now if you look, we actually do have a little bit of an anomaly. Okay, and that is these points that are moving up along the top are actually deforming these parts of the texture along the bottom of this surface. It's actually not a problem. Actually very simple to fix. What we can do is take this curve and just go up to Curve and reverse the curve direction. Okay, so now this should work appropriately. If we select this point and move it down, now the bottom of this curve is actually affecting the bottom of this surface. Okay, so how can we really use this? What is really any kind of a benefit that we could get from using this particular technique? Well, let me go ahead and open a scene for you. Okay, what we have in this scene is just a candle. Okay, and this candle is just an image. This flame that we have is just an image. Pretty much exactly what we had set up just a moment ago earlier in this lesson. This curve that we have is the actual curve that's controlling the placement, or the placement of the texture on this NURBS surface. So I have a NURBS surface with just a transparency map and a candle flame applied to it. Now what I've done is I've added just a sine wave deformer, which that can be found underneath the animation module. If you go to Deform and create a nonlinear, you can find the sine wave deformer here in this area. Okay, so this sine wave deformer has been applied. Okay, and if you look, I just have this sine wave deformer that's actually deforming this curve. Okay, and this curve, even though you really can't see it here in your perspective view, this curve is actually deforming the way that this flame looks. So if we take a render of this, okay, you can see that this flame is actually being bent just a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look just very quickly at a little bit of the shading network that we've got here. Go ahead and expand this. Pretty much the same thing that we had, although you can see just a couple of other nodes that are just being created by this sine wave and a couple of these other things. These are really the ones that we need to look at. Okay, this is the exact same setup that we had just a moment ago in this other example. This file 1, the actual flame itself, has got a transparency map on it that's been applied to this Lambert. Okay, so that gives it that little bit of a color. Go ahead and open this. And then we also have this same texture applied as an incandescence. So that way, this candle flame actually kind of looks like it's glowing. It's got a real bright color to it. And then also, on top of that, in this Lambert, just a little bit of a glow. So it's got just a little bit of a glow around it so that it looks like it's actually emitting light. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this. Now let's say, for example, we wanted to actually, as this candle flame is dancing around, we wanted to have a light, okay, which we've got set up right here. And we actually wanted this light to be able to flicker like a normal candle flame would. So as this candle flame is dancing around, you've actually got your light changing. So let's go ahead and go to the attributes of this light. And in the intensity, let's actually create an expression. Okay, and the expression is going to be on this point light intensity. So if we wanted, we could just go ahead and copy this and paste this down here in the actual expression. And what we'll do is, for this point light intensity, let's go ahead and add a space, an equal sign, and another space. And what we'll do is actually add a randomizing value. So let's say rand. Okay, rand is going to be the short term for randomization. And let's make a parentheses. And then we can define the actual values that it's going to be randomizing in between. So let's say a value of 0.8 and a value of 1. Okay, let's create. Okay, so what we should now have is this value randomly changing from a value of 0.8 to somewhere between that and 0.1. Okay, so as we play, you should see now a different value each frame. Okay, let's take a look at what this actually would look like if we were to render this out. And you can see this is what that actual sequence that we were just looking at looks like rendered out. So we've got the flame that's being controlled by the curve. So that curve being bent by the sine wave deformer is actually controlling the placement of this texture. So that's giving it that sort of dancing flame look. We also have, like I said, the glow and an incandescence to make this look like it's got a little bit of a glow to it. And then if you look closely, you can see the actual randomizing light in this area. So you can see the flame actually looks like it's dancing and the intensity's changing as this flame dances around. So this is a very useful application for the point on curve info and the ways that we can use that to actually generate some very nice looking effects. So in the next lesson, we'll continue moving on with some very nice advanced shading networks for your everyday use.